Ordinary people may feel that this is something that has come down from on high, it's been implemented. They may say, well, it's up to my legislators to do something, or the State Board of Education to do something. Can ordinary people stop Common Core? And if so, how do they go about doing it?
Well, that's a great question. I think they absolutely can do something about it, and they actually have to, because the stakes are so high. This is not an issue that can be ignored, because it really affects not just our children's future, but really our country's future. And I would say that really the most powerful weapon that we have had, at least in the state of Indiana, and I think everywhere this is the case, is that the truth and the facts are overwhelmingly on the side of the Common Core opponents. And that is a very powerful weapon.
How do you start getting those facts out to people? What steps can people say once they find out about Common Core? How can they start getting that truth out to other people, other groups in the media?
Sure. Well, what we did in the early days, of course, there was no media attention, local or really even national. So we did it the old-fashioned way. We devised a flyer, a trifold, and we got them printed at Kinko's, and we started passing them out. We contacted some groups like Tea Parties that we knew would naturally be opposed to it if they knew the story, and we simply went and we told them our story. And then they began handing out the flyers. They went to county fairs, and one speaking engagement led to the next. So it was nothing terribly complicated or sophisticated. It was really sort of a timeless approach. But we also have written letters to the editor, and it's a good idea to send them to every paper in the state. Perhaps one in a different part of the state, not as large of a city, will print it. Mm-hmm. And then once that happens, we all have at our fingertips social media. And so we would, anytime we got any article, no matter how big or small printed, we tried to send it to as many elected officials as possible, other members of the media, and to the general public. And so we just sort of gradually grew our base.
Okay. And your efforts were successful in your state of Indiana. Can you tell me about what your efforts have led to at this point?
Sure. We're not finished by a long stretch, but we did fight very hard to get what is called the first passage of a Common Core pause bill. And what that did was it paused the implementation of Common Core. As you may know, states were all scheduled to be fully implementing it in all of the grades. It had started in the lower grades, K through 2. In Indiana, we were able to get a pause so that we could actually have the legislative study of this decision, which had not occurred on the front end. We did not have a full, healthy debate in the public arena. So this bill allowed for that to happen by calling for 3 legislative study sessions. It also calls for our State Board of Education to review the standards as well, and it prevents Indiana from joining a consortium, testing consortium. And so all of that is occurring, and we hope that in the end it will lead to Indiana fully and completely withdrawing from the Common Core. That is our hope, and so that will be coming up in the next several months.
Okay, so the brakes have been put on, but the fight goes on to really complete.
Right, that's right. And we have a Governor Pence, who is on record as saying he's a strong supporter of federalism. Mm-hmm. He's one of the few to vote against No Child Left Behind. Mm-hmm. And of course, the State Board of Education in Indiana is all appointed by the governor. So it's his board that controls the future of where Indiana goes with this, and we hope he'll do the right thing.
Very good. Maybe if I could ask you to go back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about how you, as a parent, first became aware of this and why Common Core alarmed you when you saw it in your own child's life.
Sure. It was in the fall of 2011 that my daughter, who at the time was a 3rd grader, came home from her Catholic parochial school with, at the beginning of the year, worksheets started coming home for math that were very different than what I had remembered with my older children. There were 3 things that really jumped out to me and other parents that began noticing this. Was that there was a shockingly small amount of practice with of basic arithmetic. Mm-hmm. There was instead an inordinate amount of time spent explaining and writing how you got your answer, why you got your answer, and they wanted very scripted responses from these students. And then thirdly, when there were math problems to work, students were to approach them in odd ways, unfamiliar to parents. So what we discovered was that this was really a revised version of the new math that you may recall was around in the 70s. Yes. Very unpopular, did not serve students well, which is why it was rejected in the 70s. And it's back, and it was back in my child's school. And so when the parents complained, we all assumed, they had perhaps purchased, not the best product over the summer, and maybe they could get rid of it or supplement it or what have you. Instead, what we found out, our principal quickly and smartly called in the sales lady from the largest publishing company in the country, Pearson Publishing Company, and they gave us a sales pitch, and they said how lucky we were to have one of the first Common Core aligned textbooks in the country. Well, when parents at that meeting still were not satisfied with the sales pitch that she was trying to give us, our principal, out of frustration said, look, I know parents don't like this type of math because none of us were taught math this way. But we have to teach it this way because this is how it's going to be on the new PARCC assessment. And that is the name of the federally funded test that Indiana was scheduled to take. And so suddenly I realized that control over what was being taught in my child's third grade classroom was now not at my school level. In fact, it wasn't even at my state level. It had been removed, and all control resided outside the state of Indiana with private trade associations that own the copyright to these standards. So no one in my school building or even in my state had the ability to change, edit, or delete a set of standards that I found right out of the gate to be problematic. So that is really what started our journey, because we could not believe that a shift of this magnitude had occurred in our state and no one was aware of it. And we felt an overwhelming desire to at least let the people know what had happened. We felt strongly that if people knew that this type of a shift in power and control had occurred, they would be as outraged as we were. And I think we found they were.
And it is an incredible story. First of all, some very dubious teaching methods, which I remember from their previous new math at my age from the 60s. They've been doing this for decades. But also the fact of control. I think parents assume, well, if there's a bad textbook, maybe we can work around it. But what you're saying is these standards are being handed on from high in Washington, and even state government, even state legislatures, in many cases so far have been powerless to stop it.
That's right, that's right. And it also exemplified to me something that I hadn't really realized until this point, was that we were struggling to, we were all a group of college-educated adults, and we were struggling to do our third graders' homework correctly. We couldn't figure out the type of answer they wanted. So suddenly I realized that this idea that you can just do your own thing, whether you're a homeschooler or in a private Christian school or what have you, and completely disregard the standards, doesn't necessarily always work, because you will be disadvantaged, at least in the area of math. I could see very clearly how someone who had been taught with a traditional method and was not familiar with some of these methods they were trying to teach would be disadvantaged on the test.
And that's, I think, important for people out there. They may think, well, I won't worry about it, but as you're saying, well, you have the standards at one end, but at the closing gate, at the finish line, you have the tests that everyone's going to have to go by. And so that's another factor that gets in. It's not just the standards, it's a whole system that's going to affect every school, including, in your case, a Catholic school.
Correct. And another point that I think is interesting that was mentioned today is that this is a real shift. Previously in Indiana, we had a test once a year in the spring. Now, was it the best test? I don't know. But when Indiana signed on to the PARCC assessment, and again, that's the federally funded test, it was very much sold as revolutionary because it was to be through course testing, and through course testing means it was to occur throughout the school year, different periods of time. We were told it would be 4 times a year. Now that means it's really intended to drive the curriculum and what happens in the classroom in a way that we previously haven't seen. It also drives the order in which things are taught. If a teacher thinks that perhaps it's not the right order, well, if you have to take a test at the end of the first quarter that's going to ask you those things, you're not really free to shift when something's taught if you believe it belongs somewhere else.
I know under No Child Left Behind, many parents complained about school being test-oriented, but it sounds as if the Common Core standards are even more test-oriented than No Child Left Behind.
It does, and it's a new ball game because now teachers' pay is tied to the test in most states, so these are more of a high-stakes assessment. And you will probably see teaching with fidelity much more so than in the past. A teacher's freedom to deviate will be far less likely to occur.
Sounds like it's a bad deal for everyone involved. Any last words you'd like to say to parents out there who are concerned or even curious about that? Any final things we haven't touched on?
Sure. I would just say, if you're interested and you take the time to research it, I think you will be interested. There are a lot of sources of information. One of them is Truth in American Education. There's a website which you can access, www.truthinamericaneducation.com, and you can educate yourself. And if you, hopefully anyone who takes the time to look into this will feel called, as so many of us in Indiana were, to spread the truth, because it's really through the free flow of information, which we're so lucky to have in this country, and exercising our right to free speech, that this will be turned around. And I would caution you, don't be discouraged if at first you run into people who say, oh, I can't change it, why are you bothering, wasting your time? Move on. But there are those few people in your state who will feel as you do a need to get this message out. And it's amazing when people band together with the free flow of information and spreading the truth, what can be accomplished.
Great. Thank you very much.